Hello, my name is President Barack Obama.
Hi, my name is Oprah.
Hello, my name is President John F. Kennedy.
Hello, my name is Tiger Woods.
Hello, my name is Condoleezza Rice.
Hello, my name is Reba McIntyre.
Hello, my name is Albert Einstein.
Black History Month is a month for us to learn about our heritages and the people who fought for our freedom.
I remember whenever I was president, it was a hard time for blacks, and they weren't always treated fairly. But I remember my brother and I, we always thought that blacks and whites were equal to each other, but unfortunately the whole country didn't see it as we saw it.
I just can't believe that we have came so far from where our ancestors were at.
I can't imagine what life would have been.
We don't realize how good we have it. African Americans have went through some hard times.
I've heard the many stories of how we amaze people with our tremendous courage.
The famous rebellion pretty much all started with a slave named Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman was born into slavery. Physical violence was a part of daily life for Tubman and her family. The violence she suffered early in life caused permanent physical injuries. She carried the scars for the rest of her life. The most severe injury occurred when Tubman was an adolescent, sent to a dry goods store for supplies. She encountered a slave who had left the fields without permission. The man's overseer demanded that Tubman help restrain the runaway. When Harriet refused, the overseer threw a 2-pound weight that struck her in the head. Tubman endured seizures, severe headaches, and narcoleptic episodes for the rest of her life. She also experienced intense dream states, which she classified as religious experiences. A devout Christian, Tubman ascribed the visions and vivid dreams to revelations from God. She escaped at the age of 29, fleeing to Philadelphia. Tubman made use of the network known as the Underground Railroad. She crossed into the free state of Pennsylvania with a feeling of relief and awe, and recalled later, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." Rather than remaining in the safety of the North, Tubman made it her mission to rescue her family and others living in slavery. This was the first of many trips by Tubman, who earned the nickname Moses for her leadership. She returned to the South at least 19 times to lead her family and hundreds of other slaves to the freedom via the Underground Railroad. Utilizing her native intelligence and drawing on her boundless courage, she eluded bounty hunters seeking a reward for her capture, which eventually went as high as $40,000. She never lost a fugitive or allowed one to turn back. Two things sustained her: the pistol at her side and her faith in God. She would not hesitate to use the pistol in self-defense, but it was also a symbol to instruct slaves, making it clear: live free or die. The Underground Railroad, organized by abolitionists or agents who dedicated their lives and energies to bringing enslaved black people out of the South into freedom. It has been estimated that as many as 75,000 blacks were assisted by Underground Railroad stations, as the safe houses along the way were called. The dynamics of escaping slavery changed in 1850 with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law. This law stated that escaped slaves could be captured in the North and returned to slavery, leading to the abduction of former slaves and free blacks living in free states. Law enforcement officials in the North were compelled to aid the capture of slaves, regardless of their personal principles. In response to law, Tubman rerouted the Underground Railroad to Canada, which prohibited slavery. In December 1851, Tubman guided a group of 11 fugitives northward. There is evidence to suggest that the party stopped at the home of an abolitionist farmer slave, Frederick Douglass. In 1869, the famous ex-slave and abolitionist Douglass wrote to Harriet Tubman, another ex-slave who was also actively involved in Black American struggle for freedom. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witness of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism. Much that you have done would seem improbable to those who don't know you as I do. The improbable heroism that Douglass referred to was Tubman's involvement in the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman remained active during the Civil War, working for the Union Army as a cook and nurse. Tubman quickly became an armed scout and spy, the first woman to lead an unarmed expedition in the war. She guided the Combahee River raid, which liberated more than 700 slaves in North Carolina. Harriet Tubman, widely known and well respected while she was alive, became an American icon in the years after she died. A survey at the end of the 20th century named her as one of the most famous civilians in American history before the Civil War. She continues to inspire generations of Americans struggling for civil rights with her bravery. When she died, Tubman was buried with military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn.
Wow. Harriet Tubman was the greatest woman that ever lived.
Another powerful person during that time was a man named Frederick Douglass.
He was self-taught and became a very powerful speaker.
Yes, he was an important person to the freeing of slaves.
Abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland. He became one of the most famous intellectuals of his time, advising presidents and lecturing the 2000s on a range of causes, including women's rights. It was at the old home that Frederick Douglass first acquired the skills that he would vault him to national celebrity. He read newspapers avidly and sought out political writing and literature as much as possible. Hired out of William Freeland, he taught other slaves on the plantation to read the New Testament at a weekly church service. Frederick Douglass tried to escape from slavery twice before he succeeded. He was assisted in his final attempt by Anna Murray, a free black woman in Baltimore with whom Douglass had fallen in love. Frederick Douglass joined a black church and regularly attended abolitionist meetings. He also subscribed to William Lloyd Garrison's weekly journal, The Liberator. Eventually, Douglass was asked to tell his story at abolitionist meetings, after which he became a regular anti-slavery lecturer. William Lloyd Garrison was impressed with Douglass' strength and rhetorical skill, and wrote of him in The Liberator. At the urging of William Lloyd Garrison, Douglass published his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, in 1845. The book was a bestseller in the United States. Douglass produced some abolitionist newspapers, the North Star, Frederick Douglass's paper. In addition to abolition, Douglass became an outspoken supporter of women's rights. In 1848, he was the only African American to attend the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, New York. By the time of the Civil War, Douglass was one of the most famous black men in the country. He used his status to influence the role of African Americans in the war and their status in the country. In 1863, Douglass conferred with President Abraham Lincoln regarding the treatment of black soldiers and on the subject of black suffrage. Douglass became the first African American nominated for Vice President of the United States. Douglass was a firm believer in the equality of all people, whether black, female, Native American, or recent immigrant, famously quoted as saying, "I would unite the anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong." Abraham Lincoln is regarded as one of America's greatest heroes due to both his incredible impact on the nation and his unique appeal. His is a remarkable story of the rise from humble beginnings to achieve the highest office in the land. Then, a sudden and tragic death at a time when his country needed him most to complete the great task remaining before the nation. Lincoln's distinctively human and humane personality and historical role as a savior of the Union and emancipator of the slaves creates a legacy that endures. On September 22, 1862, Abraham felt confident enough to reshape the cause of the war from Union to abolishing slavery. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, which stated that all individuals who were held as slaves henceforward shall be free.
Who was that lady that wouldn't move to the back of the bus?
That was Rosa Parks.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She was arrested for refusing to give up her seat.
She was a strong, admirable woman that stood up for herself and what was right.
Civil rights activist Rosa Parks was born on February 4, 1913, in Tuskegee, Alabama. Her refusal to surrender her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery, Alabama bus spurred a citywide boycott. The city of Montgomery had no choice but to lift the law requiring segregation on public buses. But Rosa refused and remained seated. The bus driver demanded, "Why don't you stand up?" To which Rosa replied, "I don't think I should have to stand up." The bus driver called the police and had her arrested later. Rosa recalled that her refusal wasn't because she was physically tired, but that she was tired of giving in. The police arrested Rosa at the scene and charged her with violation of Chapter 6, Section 11, and the Montgomery City Code. She was taken to police headquarters. On the evening that Rosa Parks was arrested, E.D. Nixon, head of local chapter of the NAACP, began reforming plans to organize a boycott of Montgomery City buses. President Bill Clinton awarded Parks with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor given by the United States executive branch. The following year, she was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest award given by the U.S. legislative branch. In 1999, Time magazine named Rosa Parks on its list of the 20 most influential people of the 20th century. President Barack Obama unveiled a statue of honoring Parks in the nation's Capitol building. He remembered Parks, according to the New York Times, by saying, "In a single moment, with the simplest gestures, she helped change America and change the world."
I wish I could have been there when Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech. I bet it was a very powerful place to be.
I agree. I've met Dr. Martin Luther King a few times, and I think he's a very admirable man.
Me being the successful woman I am has a lot to do with the foundation Martin Luther King set.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. King, both a Baptist minister and civil rights activist, had a seismic impact on race relations in the United States, beginning in the mid-1950s. Through his activism, he played a pivotal role in ending the legal segregation of African American citizens in the South and other areas of the nation. Born as Michael King Jr., MLK's grandfather, A.D. Williams, was a rural minister for years in Atlanta. He took over a small, struggling Ebenezer Baptist church with around 13 members and made it into a forceful congregation. Michael King Sr. stepped in as a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church upon the death of his father-in-law, and he too became a successful minister and adopted the name Martin Luther King Sr. in honor of the religious leader Martin Luther. In due time, Michael Jr. would follow his father's lead and adopt the name himself. In 1948, Martin Luther King Jr. earned a sociology degree from Morehouse College. He thrived in all his studies and was valedictorian of his class in 1951 and elected student body president. After being accepted at several colleges for his doctoral study, including Yale, King enrolled in Boston University. During work on this doctorate, Martin Luther King Jr. met Coretta Scott, an aspiring singer and musician. They were married in June 1953 and had 4 children. He completed his Ph.D. King was only 25 years old. Flushed with victory after Montgomery bus boycott, African American civil rights leaders recognized need for a national organization to help coordinate their efforts. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. and 60 ministers and civil rights activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to harness the moral authority and organizing power of black churches. They would help conduct nonviolent protests to promote civil rights. King's participation in the organization gave him a base of operation throughout the South. And inspired by Gandhi's success with nonviolent activism, Martin Luther King visited Gandhi's birthplace in India. The trip affected him in a deeply profound way, increasing his commitment to America's civil rights struggle. On October 19, 1960, King and 75 students entered a local department lunch counter service but were denied. When they refused to leave the counter area, King and 36 others were arrested, imprisoned for violating his probation. His news of his important imprisonment entered the 1960 presidential campaign when candidate John F. Kennedy made a phone call to Coretta Scott King. Kennedy expressed his concern for King's harsh treatment. King was soon released. On August 28, 1963, the historic March on Washington drew more than 200,000 people in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. It was here that King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, emphasizing his belief that all men could be brothers. This resulted in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, authorizing the federal government to enforce desegregation of public accommodations and outlawing discrimination in publicly owned facilities. This also led to Martin Luther King receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for 1964. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life had a seismic impact on race relations in the United States. Years after his death, he is the most widely known African American leader of his era. His life and work have been honored with a national holiday.
There has been lots of famous African Americans in sports that have paved the way in Black history.
Yeah, also singers like Ray Charles, Jimi Hendrix, and Sammy Davis Jr.
Education is also very important. Have you heard of George Washington Carver? Well, he was the one who, many black inventors who made inventions and shaped our country.
Jack Roosevelt Robinson was born on January 31st, 1919. Breaking the color barrier, Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play in baseball's major leagues. Robinson was raised in relative poverty by a single mother. Robinson's older brother, Matthew Robinson, inspired Jackie to pursue his talent and love for athletics. Matthew won a silver medal in the 200-meter dash, just behind Jesse Owens, at the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. Jackie Robinson began to play baseball professionally. At the time, the sport was segregated, and African Americans and whites played in separate leagues. But he was soon chosen by Branch Rickey, president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, to help integrate Major League Baseball, and played his first game in Ebbets Field for Brooklyn Dodgers on April 15, 1947, becoming the first black player to compete in the major league. There would be difficult times ahead for the young athlete, and so made Robinson promise to not fight back when confronted with racism. In one incident, while fans harassed Robinson from the stands, Reese walked over and put his arm around his teammate, a gesture that has become legendary in baseball history. Jackie Robinson succeeded in putting the prejudice and racial strife aside and showed everyone what a talented player he was, and was the first African American to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. On April 15, 1997, Robinson's jersey number 42 was retired throughout Major League Baseball. Malcolm X, born on May 15, 1925, was a prominent black nationalist leader who articulate, passionate, and a naturally gifted and inspirational orator. Malcolm X exhorted African Americans to cast off the shackles of racism. Bessie Smith was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee on April 15, 1894. She began to sing at a young age and in 1923 signed a contract with Columbia Records. She was among the highest paid black performers of her time. She quickly became the favorite singer of the jazz public. The power and somber beauty of her voice, coupled with songs representing variety of the blues. Thurgood Marshall, born on July 2, 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland. As counsel to the NAACP, he utilized the judiciary to champion equality for African Americans. In 1954, he won the Brown versus Board of Education case, in which the Supreme Court ended racial segregation in public schools. Jesse Owens, son of a sharecropper and the grandson of slaves, Jesse Owens was born on September 12, 1913. For Adolf Hitler, the Nazis in 1936, Berlin Olympic Games were expected to be a German showcase, cement America's success at the Olympic Games. But it was the African American participants who helped. The United States won 11 gold medals, 6 of them by black athletes. Owens was easily the most dominant athlete to compete. He captured 4 gold medals. Sheryl Swoopes. Sheryl Swoopes is an American professional basketball player and is considered one of the best female basketball players of all time, for becoming the first player signed to the WNBA, referred to as the female Michael Jordan. Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen is the popular name of African American pilots who fought in the World War II. The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces. During World War II, African Americans in many U.S. states were still subject to the Jim Crow laws, and the American military was racially segregated, as was much of the federal government. The Tuskegee Airmen were subjected to racial discrimination both within and outside the Army. All black military pilots were trained located near Tuskegee, Alabama. When the pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group painted the tails of their P-47s and later P-51s red, the nickname Red Tails was coined. Bomber crews applied a more offensive red tail Angels.
Some of the most famous African Americans were nameless. They are the people that participated in civil rights movements such as freedom riders, nonviolent marches, and sit-ins. These were true heroes of our American history.
Sit-ins. In February 1960, a group of African American students began what became known as the sit-in movement in Greensboro, North Carolina. The students would sit at a racially segregated lunch counters in the city stores. When asked to leave or sit in the colored section, they just remained seated, subjecting themselves to verbal and sometimes physical abuse. The movement quickly gained traction in several other cities. In April 1960, the SCLC held a conference to Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, with local sit-in leaders. Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged students to continue to use nonviolent methods. During their protest out of this meeting, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee formed and for a time, worked closely with the SCLC. By August of 1960, the sit-ins had been successful in ending segregation at lunch counters in 27 southern cities.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. That my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. From every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.